You know that feeling, right? A situation starts escalating, the adrenaline hits, and your immediate reflex is to just reach into your pocket and pull out your phone.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we just instinctively hit record these days.
Right, because we have this idea internalized that video evidence is, the ultimate shield. You get the footage, and boom, objective truth is on your side. But today's deep dive is actually about what happens when that exact instinct turns into a total legal minefield.
Yeah, it's a wild situation. We are looking at an actual audio recording of a consultation between a citizen, a guy named James Red, and a legal professional, a paralegal named Margaret.
And the tension in this recording is just off the charts. We are basically unpacking a huge collision between data privacy laws and, well, a really messy neighborhood dispute.
Exactly. The core mission here is to figure out what happens when you try to gather photographic evidence to protect yourself, but the authorities actually tell you that you are the one breaking the law.
Right, which just sounds so counterintuitive. I mean, before we even get into the whole debate over taking photos, we really need to look at the deeply frustrating context here. This didn't just happen overnight.
No, not at all. So, James has lived on his property for 8.5 years. It's right next to an area called Caroline Woods, on a street named after a German lady, Helen Kahn.
Okay, so he's been there a while.
Yeah, but here is the kicker. Over those 8.5 years, he claims he has called the police over 100 times for various incidents.
Wait, 100 times? That is wild.
Right. He mentions being attacked while walking his dogs, things like that. But his main frustration is that whenever he calls for help, the police kind of flip the script on him. He feels like they treat him as the suspect instead of the victim.
Wow, so he already has this massive deficit of trust with local law enforcement. That totally changes how you interact with your surroundings.
Completely. You start feeling hyper vigilant, and when you think the official record is always going to be biased against you, you feel forced to become your own investigator.
Which brings us to the actual inciting incident. James has this neighbor, Moira, who hires these grass cutters, and they are working right along their shared fence without any protective barriers.
Yeah, and because of that, stones are getting flicked up and hitting James's windows.
Which is super frustrating. And Jack actually tried to mitigate it, right? Like, he put up some shade cloth on his side of the fence.
He did, yeah. But it just doesn't cover his higher kitchen windows. And the police have even warned Moira about this before, but the issue just keeps happening.
So, feeling completely abandoned by the authorities, the next time he hears those mowers start up and stones start flying, James bypasses the police and goes straight for his camera.
Exactly. He takes photos from his kitchen window just to prove the property damage is happening. But incidentally, Moira ends up in the frame of those photos.
And that is the exact moment this standard property dispute mutates into a massive debate over privacy. I have to bring up a common analogy here because society basically encourages us to document accidents. Look at dash cams.
Oh yeah, dash cams are a perfect example.
Right. Insurance companies practically beg you to have one.
Yeah.
And those cameras are passively capturing hundreds of faces and license plates every single hour.
That is very true.
So if James had a dash cam documenting a reckless driver, nobody would care. But he moves that lens from his car dashboard to his kitchen window to document property damage, and suddenly he's treated like a criminal. Why do the police flag that as a crime?
Well, it really comes down to the social contract of the physical space.
Yeah.
A roadway is a public sphere. When you drive, you kind of implicitly surrender some privacy.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
But a kitchen window pointing over a backyard fence crosses a major psychological boundary. From Moira's perspective, that camera lens is piercing her private domain. And police responding to that aren't there to debate constitutional law,
Right, they just see a very angry neighbor feeling surveilled and want to shut the conflict down.
Exactly. They see the camera as the thing throwing gas on the fire.
So that brings us to the consultation with Margaret, the paralegal. She takes that initial police skepticism and turns it into this strict legal absolute.
She really does. The second James mentions taking those photos, she immediately claims it is completely illegal to photograph anyone without their permission.
And she cites the POPI Act, right, the Protection of Personal Information Act. But wait, aren't data privacy acts meant to stop, giant tech companies from harvesting our digital data?
Yes, exactly. They were designed for server farms and corporate data brokers. But Margaret is applying that exact same framework to a frustrated guy with a smartphone in his kitchen.
That just seems so disconnected from reality. How does she even justify that?
Well, she relies on a super broad reading of what processing personal information actually means. Technically, an image with a recognizable face is biometric data. So she argues that just hitting the shutter button is a statutory violation if you don't have consent.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here against James for a second because he pushes back hard against this.
He definitely does.
He insists he's consulted experts and says taking photos of people is only illegal if it's obstructive or invasive, which he defines as harassment, like getting right up in someone's face.
Right, he's drawing a hard line there.
And he argues that Moira was just captured incidentally while he was documenting the grass cutters. But, I mean, this is his neighbor. They have a very hostile history. Isn't it pretty likely he actually wanted her in the frame to prove she was responsible?
That is the notoriously difficult part about enforcing privacy laws. Proving someone's intent is incredibly tricky.
Because if I'm Margaret, I might think he's using incidental capture as a very convenient loophole for what is actually targeted intimidation.
That is a totally valid read. A camera can absolutely be a tool for intimidation. But James is also leaning on a real legal principle here regarding public or semi-public spaces.
The freedom of observation, right?
Exactly. He is trying to articulate the difference between incidental capture, where someone just happens to be in a scene you were filming, and targeted surveillance, where your main goal is capturing that specific person.
Right. Like, if I take a wide-angle photo of a beautiful building in a crowded city center, I'm capturing dozens of strangers. The POPI Act doesn't make me a criminal for that, does it?
No, it really shouldn't. And to try and bridge this gap, James and Margaret actually both pivot to using analogies.
Oh, the church analogies. This part of the recording is so fascinating because they both independently choose to use tourists at a church to prove their completely opposite points.
It is a wild coincidence. Do you want to break down James's version first?
Yeah. So James sets up this scenario where tourists are taking photos of a church building. People walk out of the church and just happen to enter the frame.
Right. Classic incidental capture.
Exactly. And he argues that if one of those pedestrians complained to the police, a magistrate would say the filming was totally legal. The intent was to photograph the architecture, not to harass the pedestrians.
And he is spot on mechanically. The law generally protects the primary intent of the photographer in that context. If documenting the building is lawful, someone walking into the shot doesn't criminalize the whole thing.
He's basically begging the paralegal to look at the context of his grass cutter photos instead of just hyper-focusing on Moira's face. But Margaret has a completely different church analogy.
She does, and hers is actually a personal anecdote. She talks about being at a historic church where these German tourists specifically took photos of her and her grandson.
Right, targeted capture. But the crucial detail she adds is that the tourists approached her afterward, apologized, and explicitly asked for permission to keep the photos.
Yes, and she uses that apology to argue that asking permission is the actual legal standard. She says, look, even foreign tourists know the law requires explicit consent.
Which is just such an aha moment for this whole deep dive, because they are completely arguing past each other at this point.
Oh, 100%.
James is talking about filming a broad scene to prove a tort, and Margaret is focusing on the social etiquette of targeting specific people for a portrait. She is basically taking a voluntary act of common courtesy and turning it into an absolute legal mandate.
Conflating social etiquette with statutory law is so dangerous, especially for a legal professional. Being polite does not equal being legally compliant.
Right, because if you make politeness a legal requirement, you basically criminalize anyone who lacks social grace.
Exactly. And even though they get agonizingly close to understanding each other for a second, their egos and frustration just completely derail the entire consultation.
It really falls apart spectacularly. The tension peaks with this stunning admission from Margaret that just made my jaw drop when I heard the audio.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
She literally says, I don't care about the law. I don't care about what the POPI Act says because I'm unfamiliar with it.
It is just incredible. A legal professional explicitly admitting she doesn't know the statute she was just using to shut him down.
And James, to his credit, offers to literally print the law out. He says he has it on his phone. Let's read it together right now and figure out who is right.
He is desperately trying to anchor this chaotic argument in actual facts.
And she just flat out refuses. She claims she doesn't have the time, so James realizes she can't help him, correctly guesses she's getting the law wrong, and just leaves to find someone much more informed.
Good for him, honestly. But this interaction reveals something so troubling about how the law actually works in reality.
Yeah, what does this tell us about that real-world application?
It shows that the law on paper is basically irrelevant if the people enforcing it or advising on it don't understand it. The written law is an abstract concept, but the gatekeepers, like this paralegal or the police officer showing up at your house, they are the ones translating those concepts into consequences.
And if those gatekeepers are just running on their own personal assumptions or pride, you are essentially trapped fighting a ghost version of the law.
Exactly. It places this huge unfair burden of education right onto the citizen who is just trying to protect themselves.
Which is a perfect way to summarize what we have unpacked today. We started with flying stones from a lawnmower and ended up navigating this wild, real world disconnect between what privacy legislation says and how local authorities actually apply it.
Yeah, we really saw how something designed for corporate data can be completely misapplied to a neighborhood dispute.
The big takeaway for everyone listening is that being right about the law just isn't always enough. You can memorize the statutes and have the perfect analogy, but if the person across the desk has a completely different interpretation, you are in for a massive uphill battle.
Documentation is a powerful tool, sure, but it isn't magic. You still have to deal with human egos and people's very visceral reactions to a camera lens.
And that tension is only going to get worse. I mean, think about it. As technology makes cameras smaller, cheaper, and basically ubiquitous, things can get really complicated.
Oh, definitely. The friction between wanting to record everything and the right to be left alone is just accelerating.
Right. From the drone hovering over your street to the smart glasses on the person sitting across from you at a cafe, it makes you wonder if our current legal definitions of public space and obstruction are already completely obsolete.
It's a very real possibility.
So, the next time you walk out your front door, just consider how many lenses you are unknowingly stepping in front of. And in a world where everyone is always watching, who really has the right to hit record?